So hi everyone, we've saved the best till last. An amazing panel to end with. One of the things we wanted to do with Cyber UK this year was bring some different perspectives from outside the cybersecurity industry that we could all learn from. And we've got two amazing people to talk in the next panel about a topic that we don't talk about enough. And that is how we lead and how we prepare our organizations for traumatic situations, for crises, because they're a fact of life in our industry. And so it's a real honor to have Kerry Gilder from Colt, the CEO of Colt Communications, and Else de Boeuf from the International Committee of Red Cross, who, in case anyone doesn't know, spend their entire lives in war zones, helping people, bringing aid, meeting prisoners, bringing some compassion and some humanity into the most horrible situations on the planet. And so we're really privileged to be able to learn from Kerry's experience and bring the totally different perspective from Else of how you prepare people for those kind of situations. So, Kerry, is there anything else you'd add for your introduction?
The only thing I would add is quite relevant to this audience. My company did have a massive cyber attack back in August of last year, and my experience is what I'll be talking about today.
Brilliant. And Else? Anything?
No, I think I'm good to go. I'm going to listen to Kerry and see what it brings up for us. Thank you.
So, Kerry, August 2025. Tell us about it.
It's a bit of a blur, if I'm completely honest. So we were hit with a major cyber attack. It was a Microsoft security incident, and I got the call from my CISO that basically said we need to get on a crisis call right away. So we did. And what I realized in the first 30 seconds of that call was that this crisis was very different from any other crisis that we've dealt with. And we deal with crisis all the time. We have fiber cuts, we have fires, we have floods. We deal with these quite often. So I was used to getting up in the middle of the night, having those conversations. But this one felt very different. And the reason that it felt different was because it was an attack on us. And that felt very strongly throughout the organization, throughout the leadership. In the first 24 hours, what became apparent is that our collaborative decision-making and cultural environment that we had to move from that collaboration to command and control. And that was really uncomfortable for many of us because it wasn't our normal mode of operandi. And so when we moved to that, what I also realized is that even though people's day job is very clear and people are very good at it, sometimes in those moments, they kind of forget what they do. And so in that environment, once again, in the first 24 hours, whether it is the CISO or it's the head of IT or it's your head of HR, there is almost this requirement to remind your leaders what their job is. And I found that quite surprising in that environment because I have very senior leaders, they know what their job is. But the sense of shock that you get when you understand that all of the systems in your entire company are now down and the impact that it has on the business, the shock of that is felt so deeply that you can freeze, and there is an element of really not knowing what to do next.
Wow. And you've talked about staff sort of experiencing genuine trauma, even sort of PTSD, burnout, even months after the incident. It's like, when did you first realize the human cost of what you were going through?
So I think the first 3 weeks, so just to put it into perspective, we made the decision within moments of the attack happen to shut down 4,000 servers across our entire business. That in and of itself is a very difficult decision to make. Number one, you're shutting down your entire business. Number two, we had to turn up 248 manual processes within 24 hours. So your BCDR process, written down on paper, needs to be quite good because paper is all you have to rely on at that particular point. So I think it was the realization of having to run the business manually for a very long time. And we ran the business manually for almost 3 months. And the first 3 weeks were a bit of a blur, if I'm completely honest. You're just going through the motions, doing what needs to be done. I found myself in a really strange situation after 3 weeks of doing all hands calls with my entire company. And we did these initially every day, and then we moved to about three times a week by the time the third week came around. I had worn the same t-shirt and the same pair of jeans for 3 weeks in every single call. And it was clean. I had multiple of them. but I recognized this, and I thought, wow, I didn't even realize that I am picking the same shirt and the same pair of jeans, and I'm putting those on every day. But it was because I had decision fatigue. And so I couldn't actually handle a clothing decision that was completely minor with all of the major decisions that I was having to make throughout the day. Yeah. And so I think that was probably the first realization of there's going to be a human, a physical, a health, a well-being impact to possibly me personally. But then probably eight weeks to 3 months in, what I started to see is we were working people around the clock, and we were starting to see some major health issues. People were going, to hospital. They were having major problems. We were fortunate enough that we recognized it early enough so that we did put a timeout on the business, even though it didn't mean the restoration would be stalled. But we had to do that because we saw a breaking point in people.
Yeah, amazing, thank you. Els, completely different environment, but what resonated with you in what Kerry's been saying?
I've given up very early in my career on the clothing choices.
Yeah.
I think a few points that resonate are the intense work pressure that you're under when you're in a crisis. Yeah. And that is, unfortunately, for the people that work with us and in the situations where we're a pretty daily reality. And perhaps then what's different as well is that we have that often for a very long time, like, okay, for all the time that you work for the organization. Sometimes you get to be in Luxembourg, like I'm right now. It gives a bit of a pause. It's a bit of a different vibe. But people are exposed to this over a long time. So you could think maybe we're more used to it. And it does bring a bit more perspective because we're also doing that where people's lives are really messy. So somehow it's also a little bit like, okay, my situation is not that bad. But that can also be dangerous. Because while you might get used to it a little bit and get a different perspective, you also have that long-term exposure to human suffering around you, to seeing people really bad things, but at the same time a lot of stress all the time. So that can also come with a different type of strain. So that's perhaps a little bit different. But these moments, but even if we do, you could say like it's a constant crisis, but in that we really have crisis moments. It could be a cybersecurity attack, and we've also been victim to that. It can be a kidnapping situation. It could be just the rise in a conflict. I mean, I've worked 4 years in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. It's conflict all the time. But when you have something like 2021, which probably most people won't remember because then we've had 7 October 2023, these are then moments that we manage as crisis moments as well within a crisis. So that intensity of pressure of work, that need to make decisions on the spot and to make decisions that are both about your business continuity. So we would call it like we need to continue our operations, right? We can't stop operations. I mean, that's where we're there for, to help these people in conflict situations. So if it gets worse, we can't leave. But then you also have to take care of your staff. And balancing that together with the short-term crisis management and the long-term impact that's going to have in the way you manage that crisis on your capacity to operate, on your business model, if you want. Those things, they come also with an increased pressure. I think what also resonates is that you mentioned it, Kerry, you need to make decisions to keep the business going. We need to make decisions to operate. It's not like, okay, there's gunfire around us, oh, you can go home and take a rest. No, I mean, that's what you came here for. So how do you manage that? And every decision that we make in those moments are going to have a human impact on people's lives, on people's dignity, on their security, both our own people and the people that we're there to serve. And so you have to, it comes with a sort of weight of decision that I also detect in what you were saying. So it's not just urgency, it's also responsibility, and it can be quite a lot to bear.
And one thing you've talked about that's been fascinating and sort of really resonated with both of us is sort of your years in humanitarian crises. You've seen people behave differently in crisis situations than they do in sort of calm situations. And I think and how do you know, or what do you do when you find that some people who you wouldn't expect are amazing and some people who you wouldn't expect actually kind of fall apart a bit in those situations? How do you navigate that as a leader?
A lot is about preparation and awareness. Not only awareness of the risks that you're going to be exposed to, but on the fact that that can do something to you, and that when a crisis hits, some people are, more cool-headed than others, and you can see that in daily life. Like if you have a car accident, or if you break a glass, or whatever, it can be something different. Some people are more cool-headed than others. It's good to know that about yourself, but it's also important to know that sometimes in a crisis, people who are usually quite cool-headed could totally freeze. And then other people who are perhaps you would never expect to lead or to manage or to be brave or whatever, and then suddenly they rise up and they can do that. And I think it's important as well, because we talk a lot about preparedness and preparing leaders, but you also need to be able to see what's happening and adapt and say like, well, maybe this is normally your job, but like if you don't feel okay with this is also an important point. It's okay to walk away. Yeah. It's better to walk away from your job right now. You're not going to lose it, but if you think right now it's not going to work out for you, you could put yourself in danger, you could put other people in danger, you could put the organization in danger. So if you need a break, if you need to do something different in this situation, that's okay. And we'll have your back, because we will make sure that we have people that can step up, right? And this is true in every life. Nobody's irreplaceable, but you need to make sure as well that people can do different things in different situations.
Do you mind if I?
Yeah, please do.
So we saw this in spades when the cyber event happened, and it was really interesting because there were definitely individuals that came out of nowhere that all of a sudden rose up and they were doing amazing things and absolutely running the marathon of the event. But there were also people who, for whatever reason, and there's no right or wrong about it, it's just for whatever reason, they weren't able to handle that situation at that particular time. And one of the things that was a major takeaway for me was, how do you train for those types of situations? What if your people officer can't do the job at that point in time? What if your chief security officer just mentally can't be there? Maybe it's, that they feel in that moment that it's their fault. And if it's their fault, maybe they just freeze and can't actually move forward. Now, I'm not saying that happened in our situation, but we did see very key individuals that just weren't capable of actually proceeding in that environment as it was. And I don't think you ever trained for that, and I think you should. I think you should train for that most critical person for that particular event to not be there. Because you never know if they will be or not, either physically or mentally. They may or may not be there. So train for that, and that's going to help build your resilience as an organization.
So the next question is probably the most uncomfortable for me, I think, as a leader. And that is, it's really struck me, I was talking with you, about the social contract you have with your people. You're going to put them in danger. You're going to put them into situations which they will find traumatic. You're going to put them in situations that will test their resilience beyond anything that's happened before. And how do you prepare? What's that conversation? How does that sort of social contract unfold?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to react to something
Yeah,
that
please do,
Kerry
yeah.
said as well on the impact on people and also on, one thing is training. I think it's also about planning. So just before I go to the social contract, I mean, I think one needs to be aware about the impact on people, and some of it, as you said, is very visible immediately, and then some of it will come much later. And so you need to, when the crisis is over, you also need to keep an eye on people afterwards, because even those who pulled through, fine or really tired, but you need to keep an eye on people after that as well, because the way it shows up could be very different for different people, and it can also become much later. And one part as well in terms of planning, and for example, one of the things that we do have for a crisis is that you plan ahead who's going to be in charge of the crisis and who's going to run the business. And these cannot necessarily be the same people. They need to be in touch, but it can't necessarily be the same people. It's also about having more people on hand. So we have people that have their normal day jobs and they're on rosters because they have a specific expertise that they can bring a language, or they're a lawyer, or they're a doctor, or what have you, or they have multiple skills, which we often need. We call them generalists, or polyvalent, as the French would say. So you have rosters where people know that their medical clearance is okay. I mean, they have everything in order to step up in 24 hours or in a week from now to either support teams that are going through this, or to replace people, or to rotating teams, because you never know how long the crisis is going to happen, so that 23 hours a day, you can hold that for a couple of days. Even people that work for the Red Cross, or even people in hospitals, they don't work 23 hours a day for 2 weeks in a row. I mean, you gotta take a rest. So you need shifts. You need to rotate people in and out, and they go back to their normal job, which also means that the bigger organization feels part of the response, which can be quite nice, by the way.
Just real quick, so
yeah.
I think it's an interesting point, because this rotation in business, you never practice. And you don't practice it because when you do a red teaming event, or you do, a purple teaming event, whatever it is, it's a 24-hour exercise usually. It's not a 3-month, a 4-month, a 5-month exercise. So you never really even think about rotation. When we were in the event, what we found was there were critical skills that were required that either had no backup, so we actually had to have them working 24 hours a day, almost every day for weeks on end. And that's when we saw the breaking point and had to say stop. But we also realized at that point in time that we still needed these people on the front lines in the field, because they were the experts. And so we had to start building in some strategies like 4-box breathing, for example, to help them get calm, but still stay on the front, have enough adrenaline going that they could still stay on the front lines. And that was a big kind of leadership learning for me as well, because although I would have liked to have taken them out, I would have liked to have rotated, because we didn't plan for that, because we didn't know that that was going to be necessary. We weren't prepared for it. So I think what you're saying there, prepare for the rotation, prepare for the marathon, prepare for the length. When you're doing your exercises, don't just do it for 24 hours, because that's usually not the amount of time that these attacks are happening.
And the impact that they have over time. And I think it's an important point as well, whether that's for a business or a government or an organization like ours. Also, taking care of your people before, during, and after, it comes with a cost. And it's something that you need to invest in, and you need to prioritize. It can't be an afterthought. One could say, well, the likelihood that this will happen is very low, but the return on investment when it does happen, and I think when you talk about cybersecurity incidents, I mean, they're happening every day, all the time, not always with that kind of impact, but there will probably be more and more and more often. Meaning as well, more often is that you get this crisis, and then you don't necessarily, by the time you get over it, the next one might be coming. A point as well that I wanted to make in planning before I move to the social contract is that often when organizations start, and we do this as well, right? We have checklists, and so you have procedures, and you have mechanisms, and you have a bunch of things, and this is really important to have those. But we need to remember that in a crisis moment, whether you're a leader or anybody else, you need to be able to make rapid judgment, right? It's these moments where you need to take big decisions with big consequences, and you need to make them fast. So there's two things I think you need to think about. One is you referred to command and control. And yes, and I sometimes compare it to being in an emergency room, a surgeon, you know, there's 4 surgeons, they're operating on you. I watch too much ER. But somebody needs to be in charge. However, that doesn't mean because I'm the boss, I know everything. Yeah. So you need to be challenged. Correct. You need to have a critical friend in the room. You need to have somebody who's going to challenge you, who's going to bring diverse perspective. Maybe not necessarily from their own specific domain of expertise, but they will bring in, actually often not. Some of my tech colleagues say it's very good to have some people who know nothing about tech asking us questions, and I have the same. It's good for me to have tech people ask about the stuff that I know about, because it makes me think harder. So that's important, but it needs to also be clear that then somebody needs to have the final word. But just to have, not meaning that like I'm the boss, I know what I'm doing, because what if the boss falls out? By the way, you need to have a backup for the boss too. And the second point is common sense. So checklists can help, procedures can help, training can help, technology can help, by the way, but you have to be able to rely on your gut in those moments, and that you need to train your gut. And I use this example about, you know, we all use a GPS to drive around, whether it's Waze or Google Maps or whatever that you have. But there's so many studies that have shown people driving through a tunnel under a mountain, and their GPS obviously doesn't get signal anymore. And so it'll go like, you know, make a U-turn. And people make a U-turn in a tunnel. It happens to the best of us. And it's just saying that you need to train that. So, you know, for us it will mean like once in a while, maybe you should, you know, try to find your way yourself rather than relying on the GPS, because the GPS might not be there. So you better be able to read a map, or just think like, well, I came from there, so probably. So I think that common sense bit is very important as well. But I'm happy to talk about the social contract.
Yeah, let's get social
I know you're keen to talk about that. So it's a social contract, and it does come with a contract, right? I mean, we do get clauses in our contracts that say that you're going to be working in a war zone and you'll be at risk, and etc. But I think what's important is that you have to have a real conversation with people about that. From the day that they apply to work for you, to the recruitment process, through before a deployment to a specific situation, and throughout their life within the organization. It needs to be a real conversation where you take the time and you sit down and you're very plain, clear, not a lot of packaging, no sugar coating, no drama either, but saying like, well, you know, you're going to work in a place where people get killed, where people get hurt. Colleagues have been killed, have gotten hurt, have been held hostage. This is something that can happen. Now, you don't want to, you know, get them into a panic, so our security measures are really good. You know, we do a lot of contingency planning, security training. We have really good security measures, and we take it very, very serious, whether that's physical security or cybersecurity, by the way. But there is no such thing as zero risk. And as we said, the point here is not when things get really harder that we all leave. Now, if somebody needs to leave, that's okay. You need to know that you can walk away from this, but we will need to, you know, replace you, etc. And then also say what it is that we're going to do to reduce that risk. What are we going to do to support you in this, to prepare you for this, to support you and your family when something's happening, when suddenly you need to be 24 hours on call for 3 weeks in a row, but your, you know, wife with a newborn baby is sitting at home. Or worse, you know, when you're being held hostage or whatever. So it's kind of having that really very plain conversation. And the second thing is that's not a conversation you can have only once. You need to have it in several moments, but also over time. People change. They might get worn out by the stress, or they might actually step up because they get more and more experience and they're more comfortable with it. But people's lives change. Some of us have kids. Some of us, our parents are aging. Some of us had a partner that we could count on, and suddenly that partner is not there, either because they walked out on you or because, you know, they got sick or they died. And that changes people's capacity or willingness to take that risk. So it's also, you know, keeping that conversation going. It's also not just a contract and a conversation, right? It comes with real organizational frameworks, and where we talked about contingency planning, rigorous training, risk management, clear protocols during, after, etc. So I think this is very important, because as a leader as well, your authority doesn't come from being the boss in those moments. Maybe in other moments it does, but in those moments it doesn't. And people will follow you when you need to make those hard decisions, and ask them to trust you, ask them to do this and do it differently than they're used to it. They need to know that you, and they have that from that previous conversation, that you look at reality really hard, that you plan for it, that you're prepared for it, and that you told them that before. It creates a kind of trust, hopefully, that will make that it's going to be easier for them to follow you as well.
So, Kerry,
Yeah.
does that feel like what we do in IT teams and cybersecurity teams?
It's not at all, right? We have no social contract with our employees in our business. It just doesn't exist today. And I think it should, because I think that in the first, and we had this conversation many times in the first couple of weeks, but every single partner, vendor, person that I spoke to, customer that I spoke to, the first thing they said to me when I called them and said, we've had a cyber attack, this is the situation, this is what it means to you, they said, Carrie, if it wasn't you, it'd be us. If it wasn't you, it'd be us. And there was a social contract of that, that, you know, we're all in this together, but unfortunately it's you and it's not me, but I want to learn from you as to what's happening here. But then what was felt very strongly throughout the rest of the recovery, and I'm just going to be completely honest, that was August of last year, we're still in recovery. Recovery never ends after a cyber attack. It will never, ever end. And that social contract of what happens in those first 24 hours, in the first 3 weeks, in the first 3 months, in the first 6 months, and then what people may feel 9 months later, that's never talked about. And I think it should be, because I do have people with PTSD. I do have people that have lost an enormous amount of weight because of the pressure. I do have people with endocytis and issues that started to propagate way after the recovery of the event was actually kind of said, signed and done by all of our cyber experts, and okay, you've now recovered. Well, have we really? Because you never do. It's always going to be a part of you. It's something that forever you're going to take with you in your next opportunity, in your next crisis. And that can be good and that can be bad. But I think that social contract, when we're doing our red teaming exercises, when we're having those one-on-one discussions, those quarterly reviews on an individual and on a corporate basis, I think those are real. What got us through the cyber attack at the end of the day was a very transparent communication. It was clear, it was consistent, and we were all kind of in it together. So, and let's be honest, I had never gone through a cyber attack. I was the CEO of the company. I didn't know what I was doing. And neither did my leadership team, and neither did anybody in the company. Even my, CISO had never actually had an attack happen. It's a very different experience from practicing it to actually being in the reality of it. And I do think these are some of the things that are important up front from a human perspective. That social contract, what does that mean? If we're able to recover in X amount of days, great. If we're not, then what? And what am I asking of you as an individual and as a company?
Now, I'm really aware we're getting tight out of time. We could talk for hours. This is absolutely fascinating. So I think if there's just one thought you would leave with the audience here, what would it be? Maybe else first.
Options, options, options. You have to have options. It will make everything easier. I would say prepare. Don't over-prepare. But you have to be prepared. I don't. This is more talking to my own. You have to prepare. You have to think these things through. But you also, as crisis moments repeat, and they will, it's also, we need, so this is the thing, simulation exercise are good. Because once you've already kind of done it before, even if you know it's fake, but make it real, like make it a good simulation, not on a computer. Like, I mean, for cybersecurity, you kind of have to do it on a computer, but make it really real life. Take a day away from it and do the simulation. Learn lessons. Take those lessons with you, put them back into your preparation, your contingency planning, but also avoid the trap of, we've been here before, or I've been here before, I know what to do because I did it last time. Because every time is going to be different. And I think also I want to point on that because you mentioned that point about, the consequences afterwards on people, but also on leaders. And I think it's important that leaders also speak out that it's okay to fail. That doesn't mean you take your responsibility lightly, but everybody's going to get it wrong at some point. And that's okay, as long as you're aware of it and you can learn from it. But also, this kind of post-event, maybe it's not always the PTSD, it can be smaller things, but that's part of the social contract too, and it's not a part that we've always had. It's very recent, even in an organization like ours, that we actually do this psychological support after time, and that we're saying, for example, it's still a taboo in the humanitarian sector to say people get burned out. We're all heroes, right? Everybody's like, wow. But, people get burned out. Or maybe not burned out, but they don't go well, and going to an organization that is about, that, and saying, I'm not feeling well, it's very hard to come out. So even that is part of the social contract. Tell us when you are. We're going to take care of you. That's important.
Kerry, one thing from you.
I'll be quick. Looks like there's 25 seconds on the clock, so I'll be quick. The one thing that I would like you to take away and remember is that a cyber attack, when it happens, has nothing to do with technology. It's all about humans. And humans are not what we prepare. They're not what we train for. So we prepare the technology, we get the resilience plan, we follow the NIST, we do all these things. And I'm not saying don't do those. Absolutely do those. But when the world goes dark, technology is non-existent. So when that happens, what do you have to rely on? And it is the humans in your company that you have to rely on. And you have to make sure that you're preparing them and you're making them as resilient as you are your systems.
Wow. Kerry, Els, your candidness and your experience is so powerful. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Will you please join me in thanking
Thank you.
Kerry and Els?
Thanks.